We now move to the 10-minute rule motion, and I'll just give a few moments for the front benches to settle. Ten-minute rule motion. Alex McIntyre.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to make provision for an entitlement to paid leave for victims of domestic abuse and for connected purposes. Madam Deputy Speaker, domestic abuse is a national emergency. All members of this House will have been contacted by women and men in their constituencies who have suffered from domestic abuse at some point in their lives. According to Safe Lives, approximately 2.1 million people in the UK have experienced some form of domestic abuse. The majority are sadly women, and I will refer today to the government's mission to tackle violence against women and girls. But we should not forget that 750,000 of those survivors are men, and ONS data shows that 1 in 7 men have experienced domestic abuse. But while those figures may shock some members of this House, they do not paint a full picture of the emergency that we are in. 1 in 4 women have experienced domestic abuse. At least 1 woman is killed by a current or former partner every week in this country. Each year, more than 75,000 people are at high or imminent risk of being murdered or seriously injured as a result of domestic abuse. 1.5 million domestic abuse-related incidents were recorded by police in England and Wales in the year ending March 2023. And in Gloucestershire alone, nearly 250 people were arrested just this December for domestic abuse-related offences. But of course, behind all of these statistics is a human being, a person in our society, in our communities, in cities like mine in Gloucester, who has faced unimaginable pain and suffering. Domestic abuse is not just about physical violence. It is about psychological manipulation, economic control, coercion, and the isolation of victims from their friends, their families, and their support networks. It affects people of all ages, backgrounds, and walks of life. It takes a profound toll on a survivor's physical and mental health. The trauma of abuse lingers and leaves long-lasting scars on victims that can take years, if not decades, to heal. The impact of domestic abuse has been brought home to me as a new MP through the constituents who attended my surgeries across the city and shared with me their own personal stories. Survivors and victims who've had to flee across the country only to be followed by their abuser. Individuals who've been prevented from having friends or even getting a job for more than a decade. Constituents who've been forced to pay their abusers rent long after they left the relationship. And of course, in Gloucester, we all remember the horrific murder of Holly Gazzard, which I raised at Prime Minister's Questions just before Christmas. Holly was murdered in 2014 at work by her boyfriend after months of obsessive behaviour, jealousy and harassment. Tackling domestic abuse matters to me and it matters to my city. Locally, I've already held a roundtable with local charities and organisations, including the Holly Gazzard Trust, Fear Free and GDAS, and putting forward today's bill would not have been possible without the tireless campaigning and research of national organisations like Women's Aid, Safe Lives and Rights of Women. Yeah. Madam Deputy Speaker, I am pleased that this government is already getting on with the job of supporting victims and survivors of domestic abuse as part of its unprecedented mission to halve violence against women and girls. We have already introduced domestic abuse specialists in 999 control rooms up and down the country and rolled out domestic abuse protection orders, which enable victims to be protected from all forms of domestic abuse, including non-physical abuse and controlling or coercive behaviour. But I genuinely believe that this bill could play an important part in this mission and could change the lives of victims and survivors across the country. But why this bill? Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, perhaps one of the most challenging aspects of leaving an abusive relationship is the financial reality. Survivors often find themselves trapped in cycles of abuse because they simply cannot afford to leave. Figures from Women's Aid's recent research, The Price of Safety, suggest it could cost a survivor almost £50,000 to leave an abuser. That's based on the direct costs of fleeing and rebuilding a new life. But for many victims, despite this financial burden, taking time off work is an unavoidable necessity. Whether it's for medical treatment, finding a new place to live, attending court hearings, seeking legal advice, taking their children to safety. The demands on a survivor's time are overwhelming. Many are forced to take holiday, Madam Deputy Speaker, to give evidence against their abusers in court. Many take time off sick only to fall foul of their employers for having too much sickness absence. Some take the impossible decision that they simply can't afford to leave and remain in unsafe situations, continuing the cycle of violence. 2 weeks paid safe leave would give victims and survivors the time they need to seek help, to find the resources they need to escape their abuser, and to start the long process of healing. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me be clear. Victims of abuse should never have to choose between their safety or their wages. Survivors should not have to take annual leave to attend court to see their abusers prosecuted. Women fleeing their abusive husband should not have to call in sick and face the sack for getting their children to safety. Victims should not fear repercussions at work just for seeking help. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, the last Conservative government undertook a review of domestic abuse leave and concluded that it would be too difficult to implement. I do not accept that. What I do accept is there will be complexities in ensuring that this entitlement to paid leave works as intended, that it supports survivors and victims of domestic abuse, that it provides a framework by which survivors and victims can feel confident in having confidential conversations at work about what they're going through at home, free from fear of repercussions or a detrimental impact on their career. However, unlike the party opposite, I don't believe that just because something is difficult means it should be stuck in a drawer and forgotten about. That is why I am proposing that the bill require the Secretary of State to come back with regulations to implement safe leave. Such a process would allow the government to consult with victims and survivors, with charities like Women's Aid, Refuge and Save Lives, with businesses and employers and with trade unions, to tackle those difficult issues head on and deliver for victims and survivors. Now, some may seek to argue that providing paid leave for domestic abuse victims would put a burden on employers. And while this leave would be paid for by businesses, the argument misses the bigger picture. Domestic abuse is already costing business and the economy. A 2019 study by KPMG shows that businesses in the UK lost £316 million a year as a result of work-related absences due to domestic abuse. Women's Aid and Res Publica have calculated domestic abuse cost the society £78 billion in 2022 alone. The reality is that employers who already voluntarily offer supportive work environments, including domestic abuse leave, tend to foster loyalty, improve employee retention, and create safer, happier and healthier workplaces. We are at a point where it is no longer enough to say that domestic abuse is a personal issue. It's an issue that should concern every workplace, every employer and every member of this House.
Hear, hear.
Madam Deputy Speaker, when looking for examples on how safe leave can be introduced in this country, we do not have to look far. In fact, parts of our United Kingdom have already begun the process of introducing safe leave. And in 2022, the Northern Ireland Assembly passed the Domestic Abuse Safe Leave Act and are currently consulting on proposals. Residents in the Republic of Ireland, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the Philippines all have the right to time off work because of the domestic abuse they have suffered. Now, as this government is taking a global lead on tackling violence against women and girls, I truly believe that this proposal would be a fantastic part of that agenda. Madam Deputy Speaker, today I hope to start a conversation in workplaces up and down the country where employers ask themselves a very simple question. If one of my employees was suffering from domestic abuse, would they come to us for help? If the answer is no, then surely more needs to be done. Safe leave would save lives. Safe leave would start conversations in workplaces in my city of Gloucester that will help survivors and victims of domestic abuse get to safety, get the support they need and get back on their feet. Imagine living in a society where victims and survivors of domestic abuse feel safe and empowered to seek support at work. Imagine that having fled your home, got your children to safety and then taken legal action against your abuser, you didn't have to worry about your job, that you could take the time to attend court, get medical help, see your solicitor, safe in the knowledge that you had a protected and paid right to time off. That is the kind of society that I want to live in. Madam Deputy Speaker, in closing, I ask this House to consider the many victims and survivors who are suffering in silence today. I ask members to think about the children and families whose lives have been torn apart by violence. And I ask all of us to think about what we as members of this House can do to ensure that these survivors are not abandoned or left behind. Introducing 2 weeks paid leave for victims of domestic abuse is a step towards a more just, compassionate and equal society. It is a commitment that we will stand by survivors, we will support them, and that we will never stop fighting until violence against women and girls is a thing of the past. Thank you.
The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Jessica Sarto, Emily Darlington, Catherine Fuchs, Dr Alison Gardner, Tom Hayes, Uma Kamaran, Alice MacDonald, Ben Maguire, Annalise Midgley, Katrina Murray, Mrs Sarah Russell and myself.
Alex McIntyre.
Domestic Abuse Safe Leave Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 20th of June, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Friday the 20th of June.